Well, welcome, gentlemen. So glad we could gather here this morning with a couple of Daves, Dave Rhodes and David Loveless. And we're going to be talking today about a topic I know that's on the top of a lot of pastors' minds, which is preparing for this Christmas or Christmas Eve message. It's something that comes around every year, and something that I know a lot of pastors. I was just talking to a pastor earlier this week who was saying, I can't count how many Christmas messages I've done over the years, and just feeling that pressure of it's a big day, plus wanting it to be something that's creative and new and fresh and that kind of thing. And so, no pressure, guys. But I told him I was going to send him this recording, so as an encouragement. But before we jump into that, I just wanted to take a minute because some of our viewers or listeners that are a part of kind of that extended Clarity House family, you may not be familiar with David Loveless. So just wanted to take a minute to introduce you, David. And I guess I'll frame it this way. We're coming to this topic of Christmas messages, right? As a pastor in a local church, why should people care what you think about that topic? Like, what's your experience and expertise that you bring to this conversation?
Well, I've done a couple of Christmas Eve services in my lifetime, and actually probably more than 40 years worth of them. And I've had, oh my gosh, so many varied experiences, and we can talk more about them in a few moments. But I've sat in a living room with 10 couples. I've also sat in an auditorium with thousands of people, being one of the fastest growing churches in the country for a number of years running. And I went from doing very traditional, laid back things to the most highly produced. We wanted to win the Creativity Award of North America every single year when it came to Christmas Eve services. I've exhausted myself to no end trying to reach thousands of people and impact them in a singular moment. And then I've gone through the whole evolution of all of that. So I think I come with a few experiences. On top of that, I've worked with and consulted with churches more in 50 different countries over the last number of decades and have watched their experiences in these kinds of things. So a little bit of
Got it.
experience there, a little bit of reflection, then we'll see if it can be helpful.
Yeah,
For
yeah,
for
most
every
most
pastor who's listening, if you can ever get David Loveless alone, maybe out to dinner or something like that, and he can tell you the history of the church that he led in Discovery, and the changes and shifts they've made. It is quite entertaining, and quite a fun journey to be on. So yeah, I would just encourage that. For those that don't know, David's part of our team at Clarity House. And even if you haven't experienced him in person, you've been impacted by some things that he's been doing with us. He's been, a personal coach to me and consultant to me personally. He's walked me through some very difficult times in the past and made sure that I didn't blow everything up, and really calm me down, and help me just process things really well. But also, in the processes that you've experienced through Clarity House, he's been an important voice in the formation of those things. So I'm really excited that he's here to talk preaching, something that we love to do. And I hope everyone knows, as you go through the funnel fusion process, there's not a de-emphasis on preaching. There's an emphasis on preaching. It's part of the process. And hopefully even in the future, we can talk about how to preach for a disciple making culture and even do some more stuff on preaching, because it really is important
Yeah.
part of the process, and something that I know many of the people who are going to be either reading the blog or listening to this, want to continue to grow in. I do too. So.
Yeah.
yeah, yep, that's great. Sweet. All right. Well, with that kind of setting the foundation, I guess I'll start with this question, and like I said, just coming off of a conversation with a pastor earlier this week, I could just see in the conversation with him kind of the weight, that he feels coming into the Christmas season, and specifically Christmas Eve, or that message right there around Christmas. That's the biggest service, here at the end of the year. What would you guys say just in general to pastors before we get into like details of what you would recommend or not recommend? Let's start just with what would you want to say to those pastors who are in that moment and experiencing that weight or that pressure?
I would want to say that it is not the biggest service of that year. It is a service of that year. It's an important service. You want to make it a meaningful service, but do not put the pressure of the world on yourself, your creative team, your leadership teams. It's an important moment, but don't make it more than what it is. Um, the Bible has nothing to say about Christmas Eve services. The New Testament church was not built upon Christmas Eve services. And so I think right off the bat, I would want to encourage people not to put that kind of pressure on yourself, because first of all, over time, you will see that the results really don't bear that out. Christmas Eve services over the years, we had people regularly reflect back on how they came to Christ or how that was their first introduction, especially unchurched and dechurched people, of which we had an enormous large population of both of those groups of people regularly coming in to the church where I was pastoring there, as well as the one where I'm at right now at First Baptist Church Orlando. But for most people, they're coming in if they're not already a part of that church, and they're being exposed to something that in time, if they have a need again, they will remember that service and that moment, and they'll circle back to you. But usually that's 4 to 6, up to 8 months later when they have that reference point.
Yeah, I'll jump in here too and just say, I think part of the way of relieving pressure is to remember at Christmas, um, very few people are looking for something new. They're looking for something familiar.
Yeah.
And so just the same way when you go home for Christmas, you're not actually looking for anything new, but there is something powerful about returning to something familiar and the rootedness of that in the middle of a world that feels like it's changing all the time. What are the things that I can count on? And so I think, at Christmas, just recommending to churches, we do want to bring our best, but we don't have to bring something brand new. Actually, we want to bring our best in a way that creates familiarity and has a sense where people are returning to something that anchors their heart in the middle of a world that feels like it's changing all the time. And so with that, I think just very practical. We'll get to dive into this in a little bit, but very practical things. I think when people show up for Christmas Eve service, they want to do a couple things. One, they want to sing songs. And two, they want to take pictures with their family. Like they want to like if I got the picture
Yeah.
and I got to sing the songs, that's
Yeah.
a success.
Yeah.
And then I'd add a third. I do think they want to hear something profound. And we could talk about how to, engage into something profound here in just a moment. But when we talk about it being profound, they don't want it to be long. They want it to be quick and profound. Most of them probably have their kids in the service with them. There's all kinds of distractions.
Right.
That's why singing is so good, right? Because everyone can participate. So you want to involve the congregation. You want to sing songs. You want to be at your best. And best doesn't mean new and creative. It means familiarity,
Yeah.
helping them return to something that they know that anchors their heart. The goal is peace, not impress. Can, is there a sense that for just a moment of time in all the busyness, they found peace and their heart stilled for a moment? And so just kind of putting that out in front of people, and it takes the pressure off of, having to do something new and creative or having to really craft. I mean, no one's looking for a 55-minute sermon on Christmas Eve. They're,
Yeah.
they're looking for you to speak profoundly into the situation that they find themselves in, but not too long on that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People, you want to be brief and amazing. That's it.
Yeah.
You can just summarize it around those very things. And to Dave's point, people more than anything, they are looking for a feeling. They're looking for an experience in that particular service. That's why if we go searching for and we try to push our agenda on theirs, you can go ahead and try to do that next 40 years of your ministry, and good luck with that. The best thing to do is to go with the flow of what people are looking for and trying to bring the most reflective meaning in that context that you possibly can.
And I would just say, as part of that, they're not looking to be surprised. They like if your church is a suit and tie church, don't make Christmas Eve a pajama party. Because people are like, oh, surprise, we're all in our pajamas and you showed up in your suit, kind of thing. Like be your church at its best, not surprising anyone on Christmas Eve, but instead, that familiarity. What can I count on? And when people are bringing their friends to church, they want to know what they can count on with their church. Like, what is it that they can count on? And so deliver what your average person hopes to count on with your church at that time.
Yeah, that's totally right. I remember we went through a season as in many years, where we were going for the big surprise effect. I mean, we would drop certain delayed dancers out of the ceiling, out of nowhere. I wanted people gasping, I wanted them near a heart attack and looking at one another. But really, at the beginning and the end of every day, to Dave's point, that's really not what people are looking for in all of that.
Well, I wonder, just listening to you guys talk about that and thinking about the familiar and saying, let's not put too much pressure on that. Do you think that, over the last, you guys would even know better than I would, the last 30 to 40 years, like of the messaging that has been a part of the typical like church growth movement, there was a lot of this that was, it was a move away from things like liturgy, which you could very much count on and was expected and familiar and that kind of thing. It was like, no, 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 we're gonna move away from liturgy and go to creativity and these big, experiences every weekend. That's gonna somehow be the engine for your church growth. Do you think that kind of culminates with Christmas, and that's why pastors feel that pressure?
I think there's been a big shift in the culture. Just as we saw a big shift in the culture, in the 60s and 70s through the Jesus Revolution versus traditional churches. And all of a sudden, the contemporary church emerged in the 80s and the 90s, where everything became, and the early 2000s, where everything became highly produced. It was all about the highest creativity. And I do believe that God used that in significant ways in millions of people's lives. But as with all things, the culture shifted, it's changed. And now I think people are looking for more reflective, more contemplative experiences. I mean, I don't know if it's any more complicated than just returning back to the simplicity of words, like where all is calm and all is bright. In most of our lives, all is not calm and all is not bright. And to actually experience that, in a 55-minute service, can be something that can be very, very refreshing to a person's life. And I think we have the opportunity to provide those kinds of things. And it feeds back into what Dave was talking about a while ago as well, how that can become very meaningful and very familiar in that moment. I mean, I think that's what we all desire, sitting around the proverbial fireplace or around the proverbial Christmas tree with our family, with our extended family. I know in our specific family situation, I mean, there are about 11 or 13 of us sitting around in our living room, and where we sit there for hours, and all is calm, all is bright. We got, being here in Orlando, of course, we don't have a fireplace, but we have it up on the TV screen while we're sitting around the tree there. We're enjoying laughter with each other and these meaningful moments. I think for us to be able to usher in some type of that in a worship service, even more so for people that aren't going to have that on a Christmas day.
Mhm.
And for us to be able to model, this is what's available in this extended spiritual family called the church.
Yeah, I would jump into that as well and say that, sometimes we want to create the binary of creativity or liturgy. And I think
Right.
what I would just call attention to is actually what trumps both of those is participation.
Yes.
And so if you're a creative church, don't, the shift to liturgy that might be too much.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Shift to create, but participation on a Christmas Eve service, how do we get people participating, and how do we create enough space that people don't feel like they're just, cows moving and being herded along in and out kind of thing? So space for interaction and being able to meet people, space for, like I said, singing, and plenty of room where we're all participating in that together, space for whether your liturgy and its responsive readings or different things like that, or even if communion's a part of what you do there. Like, how do we make it as participatory as we possibly can, and intersperse into that participation moment a couple wows?
Yeah.
Is there a song that they're not going to sing, but they are going to be wowed by? Like, is there a performance moment in there? When
Mhm.
it comes to the sermon, how do we do that in a kind of wow deal without it being too long, where they're not participating, but it is a wow moment? So I would go into it thinking, how do we make 65% of the service interactive in some kind of way, participatory in some way? And then in the 30 to 35% that they're not participating, how do we wow them, not by trying to do something new, but being at our best in what we do that is familiar to them?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I don't
Couple of
know if you guys,
specific. Go
go
ahead.
ahead, go ahead. Oh, I was just going to say, I don't know if anybody listening, if you guys caught that, but David Lovelace just gave you, if you want to use it, a two-part Christmas Eve sermon, which is all is calm, all is bright. And those could be, you could talk about the peace that comes because of Jesus, and the joy that we can have, or the hope that we can have because of Jesus. There's your message. So you're welcome.
Yeah, right. And the great thing is you can do something like that theme or several others, but put it into not only the context of what was going on in the first century, but the earthly context of people's lives right now,
Yeah.
where everything is messy. It's not all calm and bright. It's messy, it's confusing, it's oppressive.
Hmm.
When we think about the context of what was actually going on there in the first century, not only within the world itself, not only there in Israel, but what was going on with Mary and Joseph in that moment, that is what people actually relate to. And for them to see this isn't some cute Sunday school story or a Christmas story, but this is literally this speaks to, this is the metaphor for every one of our lives and what it feels like to live in the 21st century. But also this participatory thing is a really big deal. Being able to open up with a couple of songs, something like that, that's when you can then drop in 5 or 7 minutes of a message. Then you come back with a responsive reading, then drop in with another 5 or 7 minutes of the message, then having a real simple feature, but in the middle of that feature have people repeat a key line that's really the premise of it, that really speaks to people's hearts. Then drop back in with another 5 minutes of the message. So you can rotate very simple elements in and out like that. But the one element that I've noticed over the years, and that we currently use at First Baptist Orlando at the end of all of our Christmas Eve services, that again, I'm not a traditionalist, and so I have to swallow hard, and I go, this is what people want, and it's that simple little candle in a hand.
Yes. Yes.
That simple candle that's being lit, that's being lit, that's being lit, that's being lit. And people look around still to this day. It's not like they've never seen this before,
Mhm.
but there's this sense of awe and wonder
There
when
is.
a very dark space begins to slowly light up. And they have participated in the lighting up of that. Oh my gosh, the so many different places you can go with that alone, that visual. But that is to me as a prime time example of the familiar, what people are looking for, and yet something is very simple and can be calm and reflective in nature.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would, so we can jump into the sermon here in just a moment, but just in
Yeah.
regard to the service, there are several points in the service for communication that can be incredibly powerful.
Yep.
The welcome is an opportunity to communicate. It's not just welcome, it is orientation. And, putting some thought into how are we orienting people in this moment? Like, what does that call to worship or that welcome look like? The blessing at the end, these are places welcome and blessing people don't prepare for, but they create
Right, Dave. Yep.
the bookends for which people experience the power of a Christmas Eve service. And so they're worth thinking through with intention to say, how are people leaving? How are people coming in? These are communication points that are just as important as the sermon is. And it doesn't have to be the same voice on all those things, but it does need to be a prepared voice and a settled voice, to get back to what Loveless was talking about in regard to the calm. How are you orienting people? How are you sending people? Intentionality in that. And those are those are like just as important as sermon is, because it is crafting an experience. But oftentimes those are the most underplanned. And if a sermon's going to go sideways, it's going to go sideways at the beginning in the orientation. It's going to go sideways at the end in the way that you're leaving people out. For the most part, as long as you got enough music in there where people can sing, you can't go too wrong in the middle unless you're too long.
Yeah. Yeah. So
That's really good. You
Dave,
guys may, I was just going to say, for everybody who's listening, my background is much more as a worship leader, and I always went into Christmas, and we're talking about the music and the participation. I always went into Christmas because I was tired of singing the songs the way we always sing them, and I thought I had to earn my money as the worship leader by coming up with these creative and different arrangements that would make that people would be like, "Oh, that was really creative. He obviously spent time on that." And my wife told me for years, and I should have listened to her the first time she said it, right? But she told me for years, people don't want that creativity on Christmas. They want to sing the song the way they know the song. You don't have to mess it up. You don't have to rework it. It's like you're saying, Dave, they want that familiarity. And because then like you're saying, the participation is so much more important than the creativity. We
right.
got to have the creativity, but participation has to be the top value.
And with that, Steve, I think this is actually really important, and that is, Christmas isn't the time to introduce a new song. like not like don't introduce a new song. And then if you are going to introduce a new arrangement, I would say consider it a performance song rather than a participation song.
Right.
Like if you want to do something that's different and creative in that way, let it be a performance where people can appreciate it versus a participation where they're trying to find their place in it. So if you're going to do like a new kind of, put together piece, let it be performance. That's great. Like,
right.
I think
that's
performance
fine.
is actually really important at Christmas. Like there needs to be a performance component.
So Dave, because you said that there are two important bookends here around orientation and the very end, let's give them a couple of examples of how they might practically do that. Like in the orientation, we know what everyone has in common walking in is that they're the typical hustle, bustle, the stress of the last several weeks at work on the home front, the expectations around Christmas. There's already family drama that's been going on. And being able to identify with that, that's what everyone has in common walking in, and they're looking for a little reprieve. They're looking for the simplicity of a manger, of a living room, of a place where all is calm and all is bright. Then what you can do is break off from that point of commonality and say, and yet at the same time, we're all walking here in different places on our spiritual path. Some of us are currently exploring what it means to know God. Does God even exist? I don't know. Some of you are walking in, you've just found faith, you've crossed the line of faith. Others of you have been growing. And so you can actually break down and say, we are all at different places, but name those 3 or 4 different places. When you and I do that as leaders, people go, he gets me. He sees me. He knows that I am here. And that creates a different level of openness when you orient people like that. So orient around what's common and then orient around what's different.
And
That's
that's
really
I
good.
mean, really, remember, Christmas is about incarnation. It's about God coming to us. Not to get controversial, it's not a he gets me commercial, but it is a he gets me feeling, right? Like that there is, I
Yeah.
mean, the question of the welcome that is people don't know they're asking, but it that you want to make sure you do they get us? Do
Yeah.
they get me? Like the welcome and orientation is do they get me? And are they calling me into something? If you can do those two things in the welcome, no matter what your style is, it'll be a successful welcome.
And how about the close, the sending out, the benediction, right? The good word at
Yeah.
the end.
I mean, I always feel that this is, I mean, when I think about benediction, I think of it as a prophetic, poetic utterance of what God has done in the service. Like
Hmm.
so like I mean it
Yep.
can be one of the most meaningful moments for people when someone can articulate what they have just experienced and bring it together in a bow tie that is a prophetic poetic utterance. And I don't want to put too much pressure
Hmm.
on that, but I
Yeah,
do want
right.
to say it is an artistic moment of articulating what someone has experienced that they can take out with them in a way. I mean, personally, I always like to have people open their hands up, palms up,
Mhm.
and then just speak this over them.
Mhm.
And honestly, like when we're doing this at our best, um, I'm putting almost as much emphasis in preparation. If I'm not the person preaching, but I'm the person benedicting, I am preparing the benediction as if I was preparing a sermon. I'm anticipating what
Mhm.
God's doing. I'm also being open to what the Spirit of God does in that moment, but I have put time into it beforehand because I know where the service is going. And my job is to very succinctly and poetically articulate what has just been experienced that they can take with them. And,
Yeah.
I would just say, find someone who can craft that. And
But let's give a couple examples of that. So let's just riff off the top of our head. So, may the light of Christmas shine into the darkness of your finances this day, into the darkness of your marriage or your family. May the hope of Christmas permeate what feels so hopeless and impossible with your job, with the failures or loss or pain that you've been through in the past. May the and it's just using that
Yeah.
numbers Moses blessing of being able to do that. But like Dave said, where you've prepped that, where you've integrated the primary parts of the service into that kind of benediction and speaking that prophetically over them.
yeah,
Uh,
when I'm
a
preparing,
couple other examples, Dave.
well, when I'm preparing that, I'm always going, whoever's preaching, I'm saying, what's your 3 a.m. statement? Like, what is the one thing that you're hoping to get across? And I'm going to build the benediction off of that 3
Yeah.
a.m. statement. I'm going to reiterate that 3 a.m. statement in some way. And then at Christmas time specifically, I'm going to emphasize God coming near to you in the middle. So may you experience the nearness of God. I'm going to rearticulate the disorientation that they came in from and that they're going back into. But hopefully, in light of the 3 a.m. statement and emphasis on the near, may God be near to you this Christmas, and may
Yeah.
his nearness do, the 3 a.m. statement of what's happening in the midst of all the disorientation, name the disorientation that you're returning to. And I'm going to end it with, and as he comes near, may you be at peace. Like just
Yeah.
boom, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, and let's talk about just for a minute. And I know, Dave, you referenced this a little bit in some of your comments of like the core message. And you said, we need to be profound.
Hmm.
That there is a profoundness that's at the heart of that, what you were just saying of God coming near.
Yeah.
So can you talk about that? Because that, to me, that's something that's like, well, like it's finding, yes, maybe a few different words, but expressing that again. People always need to hear that each Christmas.
Yeah, so remember, I mean, and we've done some blogs on this and we released some stuff. The gospel is the birth, life, death, burial, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus. It is all of those. I mean, that's what the gospels tell us the gospel is. The gospel is Jesus, but it's birth, life, death, burial, resurrection, and ascension. And each part of the gospel carries with it significance. And so oftentimes as evangelicals, our tendency is to only emphasize death, burial, resurrection of Jesus. And we have a truncated gospel that doesn't emphasize incarnation, life, or ascension. And, you know, again, just for everyone to get on the same page, if you don't give birth, you lose the incarnation. If you don't give life, you lose discipleship. If you don't give ascension, you lose kingdom. So you end up with a gospel that has no incarnation, no discipleship, and no kingdom in it. So if you want further reading on that, we've got blogs that are for that.
Sure.
But incarnation is important. It's an important part of the gospel because it's the way that the gospel is experienced. And it's not us getting to God, but God coming to us. It's God coming to us. And the beauty of the gospel in regard to incarnation is that God comes to us right where we're at, whatever the dislocation is, whatever the exile is, whatever the disorientation is. The core message of incarnation is that God comes to us and he can't find a home, but the whole rest of the story is he creates a home for those of us who are having trouble finding home. I mean, so it is all about home. It is all about home, and it is about God coming to us to create a home in the middle of our dislocation, so that even though Jesus had nowhere to lay his head, there was no room for him, there was no home for him, the whole story is about him creating home for us. And so, you know, as you get into sermon preparation, that sense of home and God coming to be with us and creating home for us is the same story every Christmas. However, each Christmas, the dislocation looks different. The disorientation looks a little different. The exile looks a little different. And so as you prepare your Christmas sermon, yes, you've probably done 40 years of biblical exegesis, but you may not have done community exegesis for this year ever before. Like what is the dislocation? What is the disorientation? What is the exile in your community that the message of God coming to create home is in that moment? And so I would just, consider, ask, as you're preparing your Christmas sermon, put as much emphasis on cultural exegesis as you do biblical exegesis. You probably got years of biblical exegesis on the Christmas story, but this is your time to do cultural exegesis so that biblical exegesis creates a new intersection and a sense of both familiarity of what I can expect, but actually it's profound because it's speaking into the dislocation, disorientation, and exile that we're coming into with it in that moment.
Yeah, and I believe the profound nature of it will be when we can bring home the simple personal application of that very thing. Like if I were listening to and processing the content of what Rhodes just articulated there, I would then riff off from that in two different directions. Something like, so in the last 30 days, I wonder when God has come near to you and to me. I wonder if it was in that conversation yesterday. I wonder if it was in that song, obscure song I heard, and that phrase that stood out to me, that God was drawing near to me. So where I would give 6 or 8 different examples where they go, oh, maybe God did draw near to me in the last 30 days. And then to flip that around and go, I wonder if in the next 30 days, God might come near and draw near to me and you and draw us more home by the following things. Again, make it simple, make it very, very practical, and literally bring it back into their very world that we know is at the very heart of the Christmas message.
Yeah, I mean, the invitation and challenge, because if you follow us, we talk about invitation and challenge as part of disciple making culture. The invitation of Christmas is always God coming to us in the nearness of God. The challenge of Christmas is always don't miss it. So, like, the invitation is God is near, he has come, and he is present. The challenge is always don't miss it. And what will keep you this year from missing the presence of God? That will always shift and change, but the challenge is always the same. Don't miss it. Don't miss it. He's here. Don't miss it. He's making home. Your heart longs for home. And that's what I think, Steve, with the pressure piece.
Yeah.
The things that never get old are the longing for home. No matter how many times you talk about the longing for home, it's like you hear it for the first time. That like
Yes.
there's certain things, there's certain messages I think that the human heart can't hear enough of. And one of those messages is that God is near and he's creating the home that you long for. And so don't feel like you have to come up with something new, articulate that, because
Right.
the human heart needs to hear it again for the first time.
Yeah. Yep. That's really good. Now this is interesting, an interesting question, and maybe this is coming from my years again as a worship pastor, but we used to talk specifically about, like, in our Christmas Eve service, did we want to do like a direct salvation invitation? Did we want to have a moment where we say, hey, if you've never made that decision, um, and I mean, I worked for several different pastors, and they would each have kind of their own different take on it, right? But I wonder what you guys' thoughts are about that in this context of what we've talked about.
I'm just going to go back to what we've said really this whole time, and that is familiarity.
Hmm.
Like, what does your church normally do?
Yeah, I love that.
Like, what do you normally do?
Yeah,
What, lean into that,
yeah.
trust it.
Right. Don't try to, on Christmas Eve, all of a sudden, like you're saying, do something that's going to feel completely out of character
Right.
for who you are as a church. And that would be maybe doing that invitation or not doing it, right? Whichever of those, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, again, we put so much pressure on different
Yeah.
things. And instead of trusting the process. And
Yeah.
so, some of the guys that we work with, man, the evangelistic nature of who they are, like they're always calling people into some kind of response. And man, play to your strength on that. Like,
Yeah.
at the same time, if that's not like your strength, don't feel like you've got to be an inauthentic version
Mm.
because of this moment. Like authenticity is the true response wherever, like, and so just be authentic with who you are and your strengths on that. Don't feel like you need to muster up a fall. I would say to whatever leader, wherever you're at, if you feel like you're mustering up a false self
Mm.
for the moment, that's the only way to make a mistake in that. So if that means all of a sudden you're transitioning to an invitation that is a kind of false version of you, if you feel like a false version of yourself giving that,
Yeah.
it's not the right thing to do. It's not the right thing
Yeah.
to do for you. If to
That's good.
not do that would be a false version of you, that too would be a mistake, you know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, my bias, I'll admit my bias on this. It is Christmas Eve feels like more of a seed sowing time for people that are kicking the tires on faith and or the church or some combination thereof. Um, and I'm with Dave. If it's your, sweet spot in the area of evangelism, then go with that. However, my caution would be we need to keep in mind what the cultural context is in that moment. People are coming in and they're ready to get out with their family. They've had a full day, they're about to have another full day. For us to ask people to raise their hands, to fill out a card, to go to the back to a response room, forget about it. Okay.
Yeah.
That is not the time for that. I've watched guys try to force that over the years, and that can backfire on you in a significant way where all of a sudden it doesn't feel authentic to the moment, to the moment of the season and what everyone else is feeling. So don't put people in those kinds of awkward situations. And I do believe that sometimes, again, we've put so much pressure on ourselves related to what we perceive is this evangelistic moment that if we don't squeeze this just right, then, half the population is going to go to hell and it's going to be on me, and I will stand before God and be held accountable. Whew, I just don't buy that. I don't buy it.
Yeah.
Again, I want to show up. I want to steward the moment in the most meaningful, authentic way that I possibly can. But I don't want, God's got lots of opportunities, and this is just one of them that he's using with people. And he just happens to want to use you or me for that moment to either bring it across the finish line or sow the seed in the moment.
Yeah, I mean the win, Steve, in my opinion, this might be my bias, but the win of Christmas Eve is not how many decisions that were made, but how many people leave saying I would return.
Yeah.
I would like that's a place I want to return to.
Yeah.
And I experienced something there that my heart longed for. And even if I'm from out of town,
Mhm.
I may not be able to return there next week, but when I come in town, I want to return there. Like is there a sense that we've created a space that people want to return to? That's the win.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, many listening to this may know I was a worship pastor, but I'm also the communication guy, right? In church. And this is something that I talk about quite a bit, which is yes, we want to communicate clearly and say, if you'd like to get in touch with us, here's an easy way to do that. But the reality of it is, in today's world, if people want to connect with you, they will connect with you. Right? Like we don't have to go out of our way to, like you're saying, Loveless, push them to fill out a card or scan this QR code and fill out this form. On I completely agree on Christmas Eve that you are not being aware of who you're talking to when you're communicating, if you're expecting a huge response to that. But people know in today's world how to connect with you if they want to. Sorry,
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
dogs are going crazy for some reason
Yeah.
right now. I
Oh,
don't
and,
know if you
and,
guys
and
can hear that,
Steve,
but
I think, maybe strategically, again, so many times on Christmas, running so many services, we're thinking about getting people in and out. There's an efficiency connection.
yes.
But I would just encourage create enough space for people to be able to hang a little bit
Mm,
and not feel like they're cattle moving in.
right.
Like people see people they haven't seen in forever, and they're going to remember they saw them again at your place. Like that is part of what we are cultivating there. And so, if at all possible, creating space for the loitering, the hanging around, just a little bit, just enough. I'm not saying hours,
Yeah.
but just enough to
Hmm.
feel like they've connected with someone. What's more important than us getting a card is them feeling like they've connected. And so how do we create enough space for connection on the front and back? Because they'll remember, oh, I saw that person at that church, like that gives them a place they want to return to, kind of thing.
Well, and that's a powerful idea that, of course, and I'm just laughing because I'm thinking, well, Dave, what you're trying to say is maybe the most important thing that might happen when people come to the Christmas Eve service is not something that I've planned or controlled within that within that 45 minutes to an hour, however long the service is. It's going to be a human personal connection that they've made outside of that, which again, as the former worship pastor, I'm like, what do you mean, Dave, that they would that's just as
Yeah.
important as
Well,
what I were, but you're 100% right. You're absolutely right about that.
having been on the other side of the coin where I wasn't producing Christmas Eve and going to a Christmas Eve service, I know the goals are I need a picture, I want to sing, and I want to connect with someone. Like if those three things get hit, It's been a good Christmas Eve service.
Right. You leave going,
And from those things, I want to have a specific feeling. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. No, you're absolutely right. Man, that's really good. I want to move us toward wrapping up this conversation, but just wanted to give each of you guys, is there anything about either this Christmas season or even just this kind of end of year season, even if it's kind of a leadership thought, whatever, if there's something on your heart that you would want to share with pastors who are going into this month of December and then into January. What is it that you'd like to say to them? It could be a continuation of what we've been talking about the Christmas service, but I just kind of wanted to open it up a little bit further than that to you guys. I know you both have those pastor type hearts.
Yeah.
So what is it that you'd want to say?
I'll reiterate something I kind of give to communicators no matter where they're at. And that is this: people will forget your presentations, but they will remember your presence.
Mhm.
Like if you think about the best teachers you've been around, you probably don't remember their presentation, but you do remember their presence. In a world where we are caught in between election cycles and we've come out of crazy stuff, a non-anxious presence is, I think, one of the most powerful things that you can bring. People will forget your presentation, but they will remember your presence. That'd be the word that I would speak. And that's not just a Christmas thing. That's an always thing as a communicator, but your presence is just as important as your presentation.
Yeah. I think I would encourage all of you leaders that are listening to pause and acknowledge just where you are personally when it comes to you're having to interact with this moment in the church calendar and what's the current condition of your soul. I know for me, so often, because I had done so many of these things, I would walk into the Christmas season where my soul was seared, where there was not life in my soul. I was exhausted by this time of the ministry cycle. I knew what Christmas was going to require of me, and I would just go through the motions very often. But in more recent years, I've taken the time as I moved into Thanksgiving toward Christmas to spend a little extra time of getting still and getting quiet and going, Lord, what new or fresh thing do you want to say or do in me this coming season? Right now, my soul feels like it's flat. It feels lifeless. I know the right things to do, and yet I don't feel it. Like for me, I did that just a few days ago. I was about to meet with most of our ministry leaders at First Baptist Orlando. And I was kind of walking us through some things. But before I began all of it, and it had to do with Christmas and what we were going to be doing at all of our campuses, I just talked to them about how a few days earlier I'd sat there with the whole phrase of repeat the sounding joy, and how I felt like what the Lord was saying to me is, David, in the weeks ahead, as you participate in decorating, as you're around trees, as you're going to parties, these are simple ways of repeating the sounding joy of what the angels did. And here's some real simple, practical ways I want you to attach your heart to it, in which you're repeating the sounding joy. And so, the point is that for all of us as Christian leaders to acknowledge when we walk into these seasons of life and where something is not quite right with our own soul, and yet we want to help other souls come alive. Back to Dave's point a moment ago, presence is everything, but that presence begins with what is actually happening or not happening in the core of my heart right now, and to live with that kind of awareness. And then what can I intentionally do to move that? That's more important to me than having the most powerful moving message that I can produce, where I ride in on a donkey, in the middle of the service down the aisle, the donkey is letting off gas, and people are falling over from that very experience. What I really need to focus on more than anything else is that presence that's going on or is not currently going on in my interior space, and seeing a further light lit in that place. And hopefully I can bring that presence into these particular experiences for Christmas Eve.
Yeah. Amen. Sweet. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap for today. So thank you guys so much for your thoughts and for, be willing to share those with pastors.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas.